Hello again, this is Flipcast 7, Open and Closed Systems. No, this is not the famous sea bass case study. This is an ecosystem at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And here you can see tube worms and a crab and a large fish. And here on the class website, next to the image of a very bizarre looking deep sea squid, is one of the famous diagrams in all ecology, and it shows the fact that the biosphere is totally self-sufficient in terms of chemicals and nutrients recycled within the biosphere, and yet energy output, heat mostly, is radiating away from the Earth. So in order for the Earth to change constantly but actually sort of stay the same in a state of equilibrium, it relies on a constant energy input, solar energy from the sun. And while we're still on the systems page of the website, you can see this green box here with the hoverfly being brutally consumed by a Venus flytrap. You can see some definitions from the glossary, and the ones we're going to concentrate on today are the closed system, a system in which energy but not matter is exchanged with its surroundings, and that pertains to the biosphere. And then later on down at the bottom, a system in which both matter and energy are exchanged is an open system. And later on we're going to see how that pertains to living cells and whole ecosystems. The isolated system is something that's more of an anomaly and doesn't really exist naturally. You can create an isolated system temporarily in a lab, and you can think of the entire universe as an isolated system. Okay, so let's continue the podcast. As you can see, I'm in a different location, looking at open systems, systems that can exchange materials, chemicals, and also energy with the environment. So this is a tardigrade or water bear. He's about 1 millimeter long, and can be found at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Also, you can find them at the top of the Himalayas. And he's famous for being an extremophile. That means he likes living actually in extreme conditions. Certain species can survive being frozen to absolute zero, and can dehydrate themselves so they're only 3% water. Also, they can survive for several hours in boiling water. In an experiment, some water bears were taken into space and survived living in a vacuum and also weightlessness, and came home and laid eggs, and their children lived on normally. The reason why they're called water bears, and that's they have a bear-like gait when they move along. Well, here's a very fun 16 seconds. Let's have a look at this. Thank you very much. Now here's something you don't see every day. Under very high power on the light microscope, these are cyanobacteria, strands of photosynthesizing bacteria, much smaller than even the smallest phytoplankton. Well, here, as if by magic, is the simplified balanced equation for photosynthesis, the process going on inside the cyanobacteria. And as I don't tire of saying, carbon dioxide here and water are the inputs, and also the energy from the sun, and the main output, of course, oxygen and sugars being made. Now, don't get the impression that photosynthesis is just about making sugars. All the biomolecules of life are being made, including proteins, nucleic acids, and fats, also known as lipids. And in order for that to happen, photosynthesis also needs an input of nitrogen, also phosphorus, usually in the form of phosphate. The nitrogen, by the way, usually in the form of ammonia dissolved in water or nitrate. And I guess another important element, especially for photosynthesis, is actually magnesium. And magnesium is necessary for chlorophyll in the same way that iron is necessary in your own hemoglobin. In fact, it's very interesting to note that chlorophyll and hemoglobin have almost the same structure. And now, with a very psychedelic heading, let's move to ecosystems as open systems. Similar scenario as to an individual organism, but this time we're zooming out to a bigger picture. If you think about it just for a minute, you can see that this photograph actually illustrates the simple terrestrial food chain, this time the African savanna. Behind the zebra and the cheetah is a whole bunch of grass, which of course is a producer, photosynthesizing. And then the zebra, the herbivore, is the primary consumer, and the carnivore, the cheetah, is the secondary consumer here. And we can see an energy flow of carbon molecules actually going from the grass to the zebra, and then of course in a very gory kind of way from the zebra meat into the digestive system of the cheetah. Here a great systems diagram. The main energy input coming in of course from the sun, and the sun's energy being used by the producers to manufacture all the biomolecules, and you can see energy and nutrients being passed to the consumers. Here we've got leafcutter ants as our herbivores. And let's elaborate the food chain a little more. What we've got so far is no different from the zebra and the cheetah, but let's not forget that all of the consumers eventually die, as do the producers. So that's why we've got arrows here, and eventually the decomposers are decomposing the dead bodies and producing a kind of inorganic nutrient pool of chemicals in the soil, and we know that plants take up nutrients through their roots. Heat being lost at each stage, and replaced by, as we began, the energy of the sun. Colored arrows show, in proportion to their size, the fate of the energy from food that is eaten. So just stay alive with cellular respiration. That heat is being lost to the environment, right there. In terms of the blue arrow, if we consider growth and reproduction, so your own body and your children could be eaten, so that energy would go to the consumers. And let's look at these green arrows here. Egestion is an interesting one. Egestion refers to the production of feces. Strictly speaking, feces doesn't really enter the cellular components of your body. It just passes straight through your digestive system, relatively unchanged. Excretory products really are carbon dioxide and water, and the nitrogenous products that you find in urine and bird poop, uric acid and so on, ammonia in fish actually. And don't forget that your body eventually will die, so all of these waste products will end up being eaten by detritivores and decomposers. And here, just to show the complexity of an open ecosystem, there's a lot of things going on in this diagram. Let's start with the obvious, the phytoplankton at the base of the food chain, photosynthesizing, eaten by zooplankton, and you can see the famous zooplankton eaten by little fish, which are eaten by larger fish, and then marine mammals and large tuna and the biggest fish in the ocean. Don't forget, you've got a whole community of detritivores, essentially, crustaceans and these benthic invertebrates down here, feeding on the small stuff that gets swept down, dead bodies and so on. And what else can we say here? Well, up here we can see a little hint of the water cycle. We've got water evaporating from the ocean and forming clouds, and then precipitation raining down, often in a mountainous region, and then you can see water following gravity, of course, down the river back to the ocean. And let's see, over here, of course, the sun's energy, essential for photosynthesis. Over here, the relationship between carbon dioxide from the air and oxygen both of those substances being dissolved in water and also being released into the air. Remember, as an aside, that gases dissolve better in cold water than warm water, which is a little counterintuitive, and we'll be doing a lab on that later on. Another couple of things of interest, just reminding you that the high and low tides twice each a day are caused in large part by the gravitational pull of the moon. And here we have fishermen and also coastal birds that are removing fish and other living things from the ocean and transporting it elsewhere. And here, of course, a familiar idea. The entire biosphere is a closed system. You can imagine the sun providing constant energy input because it needs to replace all of that energy that's being dissipated on Earth and escaping past the atmosphere into space. So it's a one-way flow of energy. And when it comes to chemicals, the Earth is entirely self-sufficient, almost entirely self-sufficient, notwithstanding a meteorite or something like that, or something we send off into space in a rocket. So it's a one-way flow of energy, but an internal recycling of chemicals and nutrients. Well, you might think there's only one biosphere, except Biosphere 2, which is an experimental center in Arizona. And this is a closed system. Several experiments were done in the 90s, some of them lasting 2 years. And we will be looking at Biosphere 2 as a case study. But just to give you a taste of that, here is an introduction to a TED talk by one of the participants. So here's Jane Poynter talking about Biosphere 2, and she's quite a character, as you will see.
I have had the distinct pleasure of living inside 2 biospheres. Of course, we all here in this room live in Biosphere 1. I also lived in Biosphere 2. And the wonderful thing about that is that I get to compare biospheres. And hopefully from that I get to learn something. So what did I learn? Well, here I am inside Biosphere 2 making a pizza. So I am harvesting the wheat in order to make the dough. And then, of course, I have to milk the goats and feed the goats in order to make the cheese. It took me 4 months in Biosphere 2 to make a pizza. Here in Biosphere 1, well, it takes me about 2 minutes because I pick up the phone and I call and say, hey, can you deliver the pizza?
Well, there you have it. I've only one more thing to say to you, and that is, be careful out there and never, ever stop thinking.